Hypothalamus Artificial Intelligence, HI, and Research Center for Advanced Decision Technologies, RCA-DET, a division of HI. Digital Transformation powered by real-time autonomous and intelligent algorithms, presents its solutions for general epidemic optimization management. The decision-making during the pandemic process aims to make the best decision for society, which is not easy, nor intuitive. The problem is further complicated, when decisions must be made with real constraints on available resources, and when it must consider the socio-economic impact, derived from the pandemic and its control. Simple but wrong, it is not an option, because the equivocation during the management of the pandemic is an error that can become a horror. Complex but right within the complex there are more options, suddenly the road can be narrow and long, but safe. The presentation consists of 5 videos, and their supporting documents, which summarize all the applied research work carried out by HI, to contribute its knowledge in highly complex mathematical modeling, to the optimized management of pandemics such as COVID-19. These are: Pandemic Management Using Advanced Artificial Intelligence, Epidemic Simulation Model, General Epidemic Optimization Model, Epidemic Economic Impact Model, and Kalman Filter Estimation Model of the Epidemic State. The models corresponding to Part 4 and 5 are designed, but have not been implemented. Hypothalamus Artificial Intelligence thanks the support received from Tecnológico Nacional de México, who partially financed the implementation of the CIMER/RS and CERM/RS/OPT models. Specifically, HI thanks the staff of the Instituto Tecnológico de Ciudad Madero, who actively participated in the project, and was the way to receive this support. Users of these mathematical models can be grouped into information technology companies, government, universities and research centers, and private enterprises and gremial organizations. The result of the research and mathematical models carried out by Hypothalamus Artificial Intelligence, it is considered a public good, because it is of benefit to all humanity. Therefore, HI is willing to offer them at no cost to nonprofit organizations, mainly in developing countries. HI is also interested in being part of research groups working on pandemic management. Conference prepared and edited by Jesus Velasquez Bermudez. His resume can be found on LinkedIn. A different paradigm for epidemic management. As Albert Einstein put it, to raise new questions, new possibilities, to regard old problems from a new angle, requires creative imagination and marks real advance in science. A new paradigm for epidemic management. The management of a pandemic based on traditional control policies, mainly on epidemiological criteria, without considering the future socio-economic impact, does not seem to be indicated in the era of Industry 4.0, which stands out for the great ability to project the future, to make the best decisions, using the computing power derived from computational technologies, and the exponential advance of the ability to model high complex systems. Therefore, it is required a different paradigm for the modern epidemic management. Ignoring in the management of the pandemic in the short term, the long-term socio-economics effects, is the most serious mistake that can be made. While it seems that the ethical thing to do is to defend a short-term life, it is also true that it is ethically wrong to condemn millions of lives to poverty and hunger in the future. This duality is not easy to solve. The main economic impacts to be assessed with respect to the consequences of epidemic control policies in the economy are bankruptcy of enterprises, unemployment people, migration between social classes, productive chains, mobility between regions, and quality of life indexes. Given the strong impact of epidemics at the regional level, modeling should be geared towards shaping the regional economy and not shaping the country's economy, and then disaggregated at the region level. The socio-economic model is aimed at determining the socio-economic impact of epidemic management at level of each region of a macro region. Balancing decision-making between two contradictory objectives, minimizing the number of deaths in the short term, conjunctural decisions, and maximizing in the long term the population's quality of life indices, structural decisions. It is a multi-criteria optimization model. Mistakes in the management of COVID-19. The Lancet, the most important report on the management of the pandemic, denounces a global failure in the face of the COVID-19 health emergency, it said. Government's massive mistakes in managing COVID led to 17.7 million preventable deaths. The same publication harshly criticizes the management carried out during the first 2 years of the pandemic, and indicates that governments were not prepared, that the response was too slow, and that they paid little attention to the most vulnerable population groups. In addition, it points out that the lack of international cooperation and the existence of an epidemic of disinformation made it difficult to act better against COVID. The staggering human cost of the first 2 years of the pandemic is a profound tragedy, and a massive social failure, denounces Jeffrey Sachs, president of the Report Journals Commission. Hypothalamus I considers that one of the biggest mistakes, made during the pandemic, was the absence of advanced mathematics by management sciences, in the process of having mathematical models that could improve the effectiveness of health scientists, to better understand the processes of spread of the pandemic throughout the territory, and its management with scarce resources. Health scientists know about pandemics, but not about management sciences. Operations researchers know advanced mathematics for management sciences, but not about pandemics. Considering the super-exponential growth of artificial intelligence, which today estimates predictive models of more than 1,000 trillion parameters, thanks to the significant advance in computational power, the mathematical poverty of many of the models used by governments to manage the pandemic is surprising. Hai's trial focuses on cases in Latam, and on documents published in specialized journals. The traditional goal of pandemic management focuses on modifying the natural behavior of the pandemic, solid curve, through sanitary controls, in order to reduce the peak of infected people, striped curve, and thus save lives by reducing the deficit of hospital resource capacity. However, it should be noted that the two curves have the same integral, and in theory when time tends to infinity, the amount of the infected population will be equal. If hospital resources are sufficient, there is no reason to delay the peak, and as the pandemic spreads, the negative socio-economic impact will be greater. The traditional tool is to use simple epidemic simulation models, trying to predict the future of the pandemic, under different control measures, and thus select, based on human perception, which is the best decision. The table presents some of the models traditionally used for pandemic simulation. They are all similar, based on a small set of differential equations, and applied independently for a region without considering socio-demographic characteristics. The susceptible infectious recovered model, SIR, introduced by Kermack and McKendrick in 1927, is the basic epidemic model. It describes the pandemic based on 3 states for a person: susceptible, infectious, and recovered, based on a system of 3 interrelated differential equations. A health scientist, without in-depth knowledge of mathematical modeling, can easily implement them in Excel, and with them can try to simulate the evolution of the pandemic in a large region, to use them as the basis for their decisions. This is an easy, simple, and cheap path, but wrong. These types of models were used by many governments. The map corresponds to a city of 8 million of inhabitants, which is divided, at the first level, in 19 localities. 2 alternatives exist to model the pandemic, as a single region, or as 19 regions that interrelate during the pandemic. SIMR-RS is based on detailed modeling and high mathematical complexity. For example, in a city like Bogotá, Colombia, with about 8 million inhabitants, using a traditional model to explain the behavior of the pandemic is very risky, and certainly will not lead to the best decisions. This is because the behavior of the pandemic, in the different areas of the city, depends on its socio-demographic characteristics. The solution is regionalizing the process, considering, at least, that the city is divided, administratively, into 19 locations, 113 zonal planning units, UPZ, and 1922 neighborhoods. The traditional approach is an aggregate or top-down modeling, that is a low mathematical complexity tool. In this case, the way is to apply a simple epidemic model to the entire city. The simplicity of the approach suggests that Excel is a suitable tool to solve the problem of pandemic management. But this is very far from the state of the art of mathematical modeling. The image presents the prediction of epidemic behavior for 3 scenarios in a Latam city. The graphics were extracted from the official reports of the city authorities. It is clear that the simulations do not follow the real behavior of the pandemic. Those types of results are not useful for making good decisions. SIMR/RS is an epidemic model implemented by HI in year 2020, to a generalized mathematical model of pandemics that enhances traditional, aggregated simulation models when considering interregional impacts in an interconnected macro region. SIMR/RS also considers the impact of modeling the population divided into socio-demographic segments based on age and economic stratum. It is possible to include other dimensions, for example, ethnics, gender. SIMR/RS is the core of the SIMR/RS/OPT epidemic management optimization model that determines optimal policies, mitigation and confinement, considering the spatial distribution of the population, segmented socio-demographically. The SIMR/RS/OPT was implemented in GAMS and AMPL. SIMR/RS can be understood and used by any epidemiologist, and/or physician, working with SIR, SAIR or similar simulation models, and by professionals working on the issue of public policies for epidemic control. SIMR/RS/OPT model has been published in the special edition of the European Scientific Journal, Public Policies in Times of Pandemics. The document, SIMR/RS. General Model of Simulation of Epidemics, Multi-Infected States, Multi-Socio-Demographic Segments, Multi-Region Mobility. Theory, corresponds to the model of differential equations for the simulation of pandemic processes. The document, SIMR/RS/OPT. Epidemic Management Optimization Model, Control Policies, Vital Health Resources, and Vaccination. Theory, corresponds to the optimization model, which integrate the differential equations model, for the optimal management of pandemic processes. Aggregate modeling is the traditional one. This implies a model of low mathematical complexity. The next step, since a better visualization of the spatial distribution of the pandemic is required, is to perform a disaggregation for each of the atoms, that are the basic areas. The disaggregation is empiric, because it is based on subjective rules, which do not reflect what is really happening in the territory. The detailed or bottom-up modeling is a high mathematical complexity tool. It is based on the detailed modeling of each of the atoms and their interrelationships. From the atoms, and considering all the interrelationships, the pandemic is simulated in such a way that it reproduces the behavior of the pandemic in each atom. The next step is the scientific aggregation of results, to explain the behavior of the entire system. This procedure is totally objective, and produces a realistic evolution of the pandemic. The modeling implies that the SIMR/RS model receives as input the detailed description of the city, and produces as a result, the detailed simulation for each area in which the space has been divided. The mathematical complexity that must be handled is reflected in the number of differential equations that must be solved. In the case of Bogotá, if the city is divided into neighborhoods, equations would be 738,048, and it requires high-performance computing resources to solve the problem. This contrasts with the 3 equations of the SIR model for the whole city. Simple but wrong, it is not an option, because the equivocation during the management of the pandemic is an error that can become a horror. Complex but right within the complex there are more options. Suddenly the road can be narrow and long, but safe. The staggering human cost of the first 2 years of the pandemic is a serious tragedy and a massive social failure. Denounces Jeffrey Sachs, chair of the Scientific Commission of the journal The Lancet. Artificial Brains, the Decision Support Systems in the Industry 4.0. The artificial brains corresponds to the scientific foundations, more specifically mathematical fundamentals, that allow to connect multiple mathematical models, algorithms or robots, exchanging information between them to obtain a common goal, and act as holistic intelligence of the organizations, or parts therein. Like the human brain, the artificial brain is composed of the following artificial components: neocortex, hypothalamus, and hippocampus. When all the models that make up a company are solved using the concepts of real-time distributed optimization, an artificial hypothalamus is obtained. In the case of the epidemic, Hai has conceptualized the epidemic management hypothalamus based on 4 models: epidemic model, logistic model, economic model, and control and surveillance model. The artificial brain is the evolution of DSS under the Industry 4.0 revolution, that is conceptualized as a set of mathematical models that exchange autonomously information between them, working online, using distributed optimization. This is how the human brain faces reality, using multiple models of reality, acting permanently in parallel, to make decisions. The support of the hypothalamus is its information system, which is common to all mathematical models. The algorithm that simulates the hypothalamus is assembled by Optex, the Hai's cognitive robot, using the models that traditionally make up a decision support system. The current state involves the integration of edge computing and cloud computing to implement highly complex mathematical models. Pandemics, regional planning, disaster management, and homeland security. The pandemics of the future. COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic humanity has to face. Infectious diseases remain a danger that threatens all countries. Every outbreak, wherever it arises, can become a pandemic. For this reason, the United Nations has requested, on more than one occasion, increased investments to improve surveillance, early detection, and rapid response plans of all countries, especially the most vulnerable. 2 years after the start of the pandemic, COVID-19 was still causing about 50,000 deaths per week. Until the end of December 2021, it had caused more than 276 million infections and 5.3 million deaths. Part of the solution is related to physical facilities, as it must strengthen local primary healthcare systems to prevent them from collapsing. Ensure that all people have access to vaccines, on equitable terms, and achieve universal health coverage. This will inevitably involve expenses that many countries are not able to make, to significantly reduce the impact of the pandemic, on all fronts, mainly, public health, economy, and quality of the human life. Then, it is essential to foster global solidarity so that all countries can stop the spread of infectious diseases as soon as they detect a dangerous outbreak. Mathematics and pandemics. Given the rapid growth of artificial intelligence, in all its mathematical methodologies, artificial neural nets, support vector machines, advanced probabilistic methods, mathematical programming, and others, this alternative cannot be ignored to improve the management of future pandemics. We must learn from the current pandemic, so that in the short term, it is possible to face pandemics, not only with large direct investments, and unimaginable social and economic consequences. Discriminating between the loss of a human life, and the hunger of people of scarce resources, and the return to the past of many societies, will always be an ethical dilemma, very difficult to solve. But it will be more difficult, as long as the artificial intelligence that humanity has created is not used intensively to protect public health. The experience of COVID-19 allows us to affirm that humanity was not prepared to use its maximum power to face the problem that arose in December 2019. That is why, in many countries, health authorities made their decisions based on obsolete methodologies, perhaps typical of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. Using in 2020, mathematical models with few differential equations, to explain the behavior of the pandemic in conurbated regions, with several million inhabitants, with multiple socio-economic characteristics, does not agree with the level of artificial intelligence used in real commercial activities. Sun Tzu, in the book The Art of War, said, "Every battle is won before it is fought. To face the disasters, planning supported by the scientific method can avoid conflicts, deaths, and damages, so that many battles are won without a fight, or its negative consequences are limited, thanks to scientific planning." The challenge: develop a DSS for disaster and emergency management. The overall objective is to minimize potential negative economic impact and human life losses. The solution: design a set of mathematical models to address the problems arising from disaster management based on stochastic programming models. The benefit: a set of measures and mathematical models to prevent and/or reduce the impact of disasters, and it prepares the community to respond in the best way when a disaster strikes. Pandemics have always been attributed to reasons controlled by nature. These will be increasingly dangerous due to the evolutionary capacity of viruses, and the agglomerations of people derived from population growth, mainly in those regions in which birth control has not changed the growth trend, to a pattern of population decrease. However, there is also the possibility that the pandemic will be triggered, because of an act of terrorism, controlled by humans. From the point of view of disaster management, the actions to be taken are: before. The mitigation implies, develop and maintain the mathematical models and their support database, and training of professionals who will manage the pandemic, through simulations of potential pandemics. The preparedness implies, preparing the community to make the best respond when pandemic strikes. Pandemics generated by new viruses, such as COVID-19, entail an additional problem, which is the lack of knowledge about the behavior of the virus. This makes the problem more complex, since, simultaneously, the health authorities must face the problem of discovering the behavior of the virus, and making decisions about a process that is not known. After. The reaction implies, use of mathematical models to dynamically manage the pandemic, making decisions as the catastrophic event unfolds. The recovery implies, use the mathematical models, to the extent that they are useful, to support the recovery of the economy, and adjust mathematical models according to lived experiences. To do nothing in the period before the pandemic, is to let nature make the decisions for us. Anticipation. It is the core of decision-making under Environment 4.0. It is not a question of reconstructing the damage caused by a disaster, with decisions a posteriori. It is about anticipating and mitigating with actions before the disaster. And the best way to do that is to use the mathematical modeling power under the new technological paradigm. Hypothalamus Artificial Intelligence invites to join to the LinkedIn group. Mathematical Modeling for Coronavirus Pandemic. Like Herbert Simon, Hypothalamus AI believes that the computer-based mathematical modeling is the greatest invention of all times. Thank you for your attention.